I had a perfect storm of stressful activities going on that culminated in my diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes. The problem was I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it. So I did what many entrepreneurs do. I continued to burn the candle at both ends for another 10 years.
Are you looking to improve your sales without resorting to pushy tactics? Welcome to Sales Made Easy, the podcast that helps you to achieve better sales results and gain long-lasting clients through relational selling. Let's get right into it. What is the good word? Boy, dude, I have a special guest with me today. It is a fellow that is known on LinkedIn as Professor Pete Alexander. I've been connected with Professor Pete for a couple of years now. He is a genuinely nice guy and a guy that fits in very well with the Selling with Dignity sales model and also on Sales Made Easy because he's easygoing, easy to like, and you can tell he's a person who is a real giver. Am I right so far, Professor Pete?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to try and meet those expectations.
There's even more. So Professor Pete is a fellow that is all about helping people deal with stress relief, stress management, and he's got a great background in sales and marketing too. So we can go anywhere today. Professor Pete, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and we'll go from there.
Sure. What I did was I started early in my career in sales. My first job out of college was with FedEx. And what a wonderful company to start your sales career in because they invested so much training in me and soft skills capabilities. They really did wonders for my confidence as a salesperson. Then I got recruited to go into pharmaceutical sales. And I did that for a couple of years. And then after that, I got recruited into a small medical device company by the owner of that company, who was also a doctor whose office I was calling on in pharmaceuticals. So it's all about the relationships. And so early in my career, the sales was a key driver of my career. Even before I graduated, I was working as a salesperson for the now defunct Radio Shack. I ran a local store, did all the sales for them, done a lot of sales things, and then transitioned, as I like to say it, to the dark side and went into marketing. What's interesting is that when I went into marketing, you think, okay, you're not going to be in sales. The only difference was that I didn't have my quota, but I absolutely had my numbers that I needed to hit from the salespeople, the product or solution that I was selling, or the company overall, whatever the products were. We absolutely had to make sure that the salespeople were successful. Otherwise, we were not going to be successful. It always shocked me having to either work for companies or hear about or have some of my peers talk about companies where the sales and marketing departments were not aligned. It's crazy because why not work together in order to make everybody successful versus being siloed, work against each other? It didn't make sense to me.
And one group saying the other one doesn't get their hands dirty, and the other one saying these people don't know what to do with a lead when I give them a great lead. They couldn't close a door. So yes, there is that's definitely going on, probably in a ton of organizations. But one of the things you said early on was you're learning the soft skills of sales at a company like FedEx. And I would think that would be a complete numbers game. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about that, what those soft skills were and how valuable they were?
We got pounded into us a particular sales methodology. In fact, it had the acronym of APCOM, which is the A for acceptance or building rapport. And then there's the purpose statement, then probing, then consulting, overcoming objections, and then motivating somebody to act.
Wow.
Oh, I told you.
We're talking a little while ago, right?
Yeah, that was I went to work for them in 1989. And okay. I didn't even prepare for this interview. So that's how much it's been pounded into me, but I used it. And so they pounded that into us. But then after that, we would come back. So That was originally a 6-week course in Memphis. And then every 6 months, they would bring us back for more soft skills. And the soft skills typically were around being able to notice body language, tone, and conversational aspects where you wanted to be able to be a resource to the customer, not just, okay, you got to sell. And that was what was different for me versus a lot of my friends, especially who were working for these sweatshops, basically, where all they had to do is it was all about the number. You had to call, you had to do 30 calls a day or something. The only thing that we had that was a very specific number is we did have our quarterly, and then they did want us to make a certain number of physical sales calls a week, which for me, I was working in downtown San Francisco, and with all the skyscrapers, that was a piece of cake for me. Literally, I could blow that out in one day if I needed to.
Yeah, that may be different today though, right?
Yes, you're not going to, right now, if you can even get into the building, let alone find the decision maker of that. And that was something too that was really great about working for a brand name. At least when I would walk into the office and I said I was with FedEx, and I was always dressed in a suit. That's what they required us to be. That was one positive. But after that, you just had to be able to respond accordingly, to be able to see whether or not there was an opportunity there to further the dialogue for bringing in our services.
Excellent. So what would you say you took out of that just stuck with you for your entire career?
The thing that I liked most about the experience at FedEx was that you needed to realize that it wasn't just about you. You were representing a company overall. And I think that's the big picture that a lot of these organizations forget, because the salesperson is obviously the customer's first contact into the company, and then it gets passed on to a customer service person or account manager. But it's that you need to be a liaison. And what I really liked was the fact that it was all about making sure that you didn't act in a way that would be detrimental to the company brand. During my pharmaceutical experience that followed that, it was the same way. They really wanted to make sure that you realized that you needed to act appropriately, because you weren't just representing yourself, you were representing the company. And the reason I say that is because my prior experience with Radio Shack was anything but that. It was crazy.
Oh, give me an example.
Nobody cares. I was working with people who were coming in drunk. They were dressed like slobs. They would use inappropriate language. They would scream at customers. It was like the Wild West. It probably could have been a really great TV show.
Yeah, it sounds like it does. Dysfunctional sales.
Sales. One of the funniest things that I remember that I would do, because I worked there for almost 4 years. So on Christmas Eve, when we finally closed the door to the store, that was always a very busy day, and of course a very busy season. Every year that I worked there, they had this obnoxious toy organ that had this play where you press this one button and it would play the most obnoxious song. My tradition at the end of Christmas Eve was I would punt that organ to the close of the doors.
We're done.
Exactly. And it was something satisfaction about seeing the batteries come flying out of that thing.
All right, so what is that movie? Was it The Office? It escapes me. Where the guy burns the office at the end, burns the building. Office Space, yes.
Office Space.
So where they're bashing. Right, yes, exactly. And they're bashing a printer somewhere in that movie. So that was a flashback to that. And recently I saw a post, I think it was you, that we were talking about doing a stand-up, and you were doing like, not stand-up, but improv. Let's do some office stuff, man. Back when you were a kid in Radio Shack and showing up semi-hammered and telling a customer to go fly a kite, and oh my goodness.
It was
Good.
just good comedy, and it was just and it was from both sides. I remember one time, so this was again Christmas season, and we were jam packed. People were lining up left and right. And so I'm working as fast as I possibly can. And I remember it wasn't just us salespeople who would get stressed, because we'd get customers that would do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically this one guy who I said, "Oh, can I help you?" And he says, "I need a TV coaxial part." And I said, "We had a section on there." I said, "Sure, let me help you. It's only maybe a $2 part.
Right.
I'm not going to make any money off of this." But I'm helping him, and I'm being really professional about it. And I said, "So tell me what you want to do." He describes it. And he wasn't describing it very well. And I say, "Does it look anything like this?" Somebody would be able to explain it better. I said, "Does it look something like this?" And I show him this part, and I'm pointing to one of the ends. And the guy, I remember to this day, this is early 80s. And the guy looks at me and he says, "I can't believe Radio Shack people are so stupid." And I went, "Ha." I just walked away.
Yeah.
And I started helping the next person.
Yeah.
I was helping the person with. And he interrupts and he says, "Can I do this?" And I look at him and I say, "I'm sorry, I'm too stupid to answer that question." He starts calling me all these words and stuff like that. And I look at him and I say, "Hey, it takes one to know one."
These are good interpersonal skills that we probably don't want to recommend for a customer service department anytime soon.
Not at all. We got to keep our cool. And that was the Wild West. And that's why it was refreshing to be able to work for professional organizations like FedEx, Defunct Sharing Plow.
Yes, but you had to unlearn, right?
Yes.
There had to be some things you had to just unlearn. And I was listening, and there's a post recently on LinkedIn too about a person who walked right by a store because the customer service was so terrible, and he would walk an extra 10 minutes to another store that sold the same stuff because the customer service was better. And he calculated over a period of 3 or 4 years, it was like $12,000 spent. And then there was another person that, it might have been the same post, but it was similar, where people would just say the wrong person is in the job. And so sometimes companies just don't get it and say, "I'm going to put Harry Spate, who's the rudest person in the world, doesn't smile with anyone, and I'm going to put him at the front desk." And I've seen this over and over again, where people will put someone who is completely a task-oriented person to answer the phones. And so there's no friendliness. There's no, "How can I help you?" It's none of that. It's like, "Next." And people would tell me, because I was in sales, and they would say, "Your person that answers the phone is the rudest person in the world." And then I would try to go and tell someone, and no one wanted to hear it because they're all task people. And so they just couldn't relate to this whole thing. So these are things that people do without necessarily thinking, that those things that you learned years ago, those soft skills, can bring so much value to a business and get the return business. But culturally, those things impact us too. So
I would add to it too that early in my career, both with FedEx and with Sharing Plow, I remember several times as a salesperson, I would call the marketing department to let them know I'm seeing something out in the field, or I had a suggestion for how to make the product or service better. 75-80% of the time, the response that I would get from the marketing department was feeling like I was bothering them. That sense, going back to soft skills, it definitely came over the phone, like they had better things to do. I remember back in those days that I told myself, I promised myself that if I was in a marketing position similar to these people and a salesperson called me to give me an update or ask for some help or something like that, that I would treat them differently. And remember that. And that's what I did. And that's one of the reasons why I had such a great relationship with the various sales groups that I supported throughout my career, because I knew they weren't calling me just to waste my time. They were calling me because they wanted to be successful and they needed help to be successful, or they saw something that they thought that I would needed to know. And I appreciated that. And I would act, either I would act on it or whatever it was, I'd always get back to them to let them know, hey, here's the status. Thanks again for letting me know. Either it got approved, it didn't get approved, or hey, it's moving forward. I remember when certain things would get approved and we implemented them at the next sales meeting, I'd always recognize that salesperson and give that person like a Starbucks card or gift card. Those are the kind of things that build relationships. And guess who was the favorite person in marketing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great. And so the idea of today with businesses, when sometimes they just assume that sales and marketing just does not get along and they just accept that. It really doesn't need to be that way, does it?
Sadly, what happens in my experience is that one department wants to be more powerful than the other department, or you have the clash of personalities, and instead of being collaborative, they want to one up each other. Especially on the sales side, there's so much competition out there externally, but then also a lot of sales organizations, they're going to be recognizing their top salespeople. So inevitably, the salespeople in the organization are competing with each other to make sure that they get the top numbers. And when you have the competition added on to that of the marketing department either being unresponsive or being more challenging to work with, that just adds to the stress unnecessarily.
I'm not a huge fan of competition in sales. Take any world championship sports team. Where's the competition? Is the competition on the team, or is the competition on the court or the rink or the baseball diamond or the football field, right? There's some competition to get onto the team. But once you're on the team, then it's teamwork. Right. And most people will say, you can't have teamwork in sales.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I'll go back to FedEx because this is a perfect example of this. We would regularly organize if someone in our team, and we had a team of 10 salespeople in our region, if we had somebody who was struggling for whatever reason, we would take turns either riding along with that person to help them. And obviously, while we're riding with the other salesperson, we're not out making sales calls ourselves in our territory. We're not generating additional business, but it wasn't like we're losing our opportunities because we knew, paid it forward to somebody else, that if we needed help, let's say we wanted to do a blitz of a particular area of our territory, we could call in 3 or 4 reps and they could spend the day making sales calls, cold calling for us in certain areas. It really is something where it made for great camaraderie. And it was something where I never felt like my fellow sales people were out to get me, or that they were that their success was going to hinder my success.
Yeah. I love it. And it's such a great thing to do. I remember years ago, I paired up people to prospect together because I figured it's so much more fun doing that.
Absolutely.
And then someone who was not on my team said, how can Harry do that? Because right now you have 2 people doing the work of 1 person. And my argument was, wait a minute. My guess is the 2 people are going to be more productive than they would be alone. Is one of those Absolutely. 1 and 1 make 3 type things.
Example about that, because when you have 2 people making a sales call, you have the opportunity for not 2, but 4 ears. And what I saw time and time again, where let's say I was riding along with one of my peers and he or she was talking to the customer or the prospect, and I'm observing the call, and I all of a sudden hear something that maybe my peer didn't hear. And so that has a big effect in helping further the sale. And so if you've got 2 people teaming up to do it and playing off of each other's strengths, you really can generate more business, because chances are if the person was having a challenge prior, they're not going to close the deal. But if you've got somebody there helping you, and that person can then help the other person on a future date, it can have a big impact. And with the fact that sales can be a very lonely job, it can be a lot of fun to be able to have somebody ride with you. I was in the pharmaceutical company and we got company cars. So it was time for me. We could expense getting the car washed and things like that. So in line at one of those gas station car washes. And the guy in front of us, he paid and he goes into the car wash, but he's not moving far enough along to get the thing to activate. And we're sitting behind him and we're just watching this and we're thinking, what's wrong with this guy? I tap my horn and I'm trying to point to him, move forward. He doesn't understand. So he rolls his window down and he sticks his head out. And so I stick my head out and I say, you need to roll forward a little bit more. So you know where this is going. He rolls forward a little bit more and all of a sudden, and so the two of us see this. And my friend, he says, whatever you don't super laugh, because even though he was really stupid and stuff, he's going to look at us thinking that we're laughing.
You're the ones that caused the whole issue.
Had I not been able to share that with some hilarious things.
Yeah. These are stories that I was just doing this with a friend of mine when we worked together years ago, 10 years or more, and rattled off in a text. Remember this? Well, what about that? Remember this? And it was just absolute hysterics and brings you back to these great memories. So good times.
I still have several friends like on Facebook and LinkedIn where we'll comment on each other's posts and we'll actually mention something that was like a funny saying back when we were doing the sales together. Yeah. And it's like the secret language almost. It's really fun.
It is. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, but I'm going to tie it in with something that is probably relatable because you're a person that understands stress. I was working in Washington, D.C., and we had a very drab office. It was gray walls, and in the wintertime, there was no sunlight. So you had the fluorescent lights, the flickering lights, the gray walls. It was getting dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Yep. It was just depressing. And I'm a person that likes light. Long story, I brought in a painter, I got approval to paint the walls, and I picked yellow. I'm looking at these swatches, and instead of trying a wall, I said, yeah, the swatches, yeah, that looks good, that yellow looks good. And one of my sales guys looks at it and he says, geez, Harry, I think it could be a little bit brighter. Okay, so we even go a shade or two brighter. And I said, you think so? Anyway, so this was on a Friday. We're telling the painter, so he says, I'll paint it all this weekend. On Monday morning, of course, in the morning, the sun is bright. My eyes hurt. That's how bright the walls were when the sun hit it. So my sales team walks in, one by one, and they're holding their eyes. The glare is so loud on their eyes. It is hurting so bad. They're like, what did you do? And I said, we're going to cheer up now. We are going to have good energy. And I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any remarks. So we dealt with it, and we actually got over the drabness. We didn't have to turn lights on anymore. We saved hugely on the electrical bill. So what I was trying to do is to bring energy into the office so that we wouldn't be drab, dull, depressed. Was I on the right track there, or was I completely off base?
Because colors make a huge difference. In fact, when you were describing the gray walls and the flickering fluorescence, I immediately went back in time to a job that I had where the exact same kind of environment was there. When I was working at that first medical device company as a product manager, because I had to run all the trade shows. So what I would do is I would have to I would ride with the reps in the same areas as those trade shows were going on. So I tried to make the most out of it. But what I also did was I noticed, because I was traveling about 65% of the time, is that I wanted to get something that would help me remember the trip, why I was there. And so I started going to either professional or minor league baseball, basketball, hockey, or football games. And so I started a collection of pennants. And I would have a pennant or two or three, depending on how many games I saw during a trip. And I could always get great seats because it was usually just me going to these games. Those pennants have so much color. And I would bring those pennants back and put them in my office instead of having the boring diplomas or some generic picture up there. I had all these different pennants of all these different teams and all these different colors. And everybody who would walk into my office, the first thing they'd say is, love the office. It's got so much life and color to it.
Yeah.
It
Right.
is.
It changes the energy, right? Visitor.
And you know what's funny with those pennants is that I now have them in my garage, hanging in my garage. Let me tell you, a garage is usually a pretty drab place, and it just lights that whole.
Oh, that is a great idea. So talk to me a little bit about, so that's the tie-in, because you do all of this stress management and so forth. So we're talking about sales. Sales is stressful. Marketing can be stressful. And tell us a little bit about your story about dealing with stress and what you're doing today would be really interesting.
Sure. So the last medical device company I worked for, I unfortunately had a micromanager. And I was in my mid 50s, Harry. I was way too old to have a micromanager.
Sure.
What happened was I originally had my first serious bout with stress in 2008 because I had a perfect storm of stressful activities going on that culminated in my diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes. The problem was I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it. So I did what many entrepreneurs do. I continued to burn the candle at both ends for another 10 years until I ended up in the emergency room with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for your listeners who may not know what that is, my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And here's the crazy thing. So I mentioned about the micromanager. So I had been working on a very high priority, high profile project. And I was burning the midnight oil on hours. What ended up happening is that I just had a physical burnout from it. When I went to the hospital, they immediately admitted me from the emergency room. My glucose numbers as a diabetic were so high that the medical grade glucometers couldn't read it. It just said high. The lab estimated that my numbers were 8 to 10 times higher than they were supposed to be. And so they transferred me for my very first ever experience in the ICU. I'd been in the emergency room with various sports related injuries or the kids having some sort of injuries where you're in the ER, but you spend a few hours there and then you leave. Right. This was my first extended stay in the hospital. And on my second day in the ICU, I get a text from my boss at about 6 a.m. And the text says, you have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it? And if you think about it, first of all, Ace, she knew that I was in the ICU. Secondly, I didn't have my work laptop with me because I was in the ICU. So I sit there on my phone doing my best to try and reschedule this webinar, pushing the boundaries of the capabilities of this phone. And the nurse on staff at that time, they were checking my blood every hour, and she comes over to me and she takes my readings. And interestingly, my numbers had been coming down over the last 2 days. They were still relatively high, but much more reasonable. She takes blood sugars at that point, and it's like a 90-degree angle. My blood is skyrocketing up high. And so it was my response to stress.
Wow.
And she says to me, you realize this is what put you in the hospital bed in the first place. And that was my epiphany moment, because I realized if I didn't do anything about my health now, I probably won't be around much longer. And so I spent a couple more days in the ICU, I spent another day contemplating what did I want to do for my career. And then what I ended up doing was I ended up deciding, you know what, I need to focus on my health. And so I went ahead and resigned. I started just trying to find any type of stress relief activity I could. And what I noticed was that not only did my stress go down, but my glucose numbers as a diabetic went down, my weight went down, and my energy level went way, way up. It was as if I had discovered the fountain of youth. And what was amazing was that my former coworkers, friends, family, they all said, "My gosh, you look fantastic. You ought to write a book about it." And so I thought, no, okay, I'll write a book. It became an Amazon bestseller. And it just focuses on helping people find one or two techniques that they can use regularly to help them reduce their stress. If you look at pictures of me from 2008, when I was first diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes, and you look at pictures of me now, other than the gray hair, I look younger today than I looked 14 years ago, and that's crazy. It's a wondrous thing. Now I just do it as part of everything that I do. I run a landscaping business and I teach classes online, but I also help people reduce their stress by helping them discover different techniques. I've had so many different sales groups bring me in for a 1 hour Zoom to walk them through several ideas and stuff like that. And it's really fun to be able to give back.
Wow, that's interesting. Is there something that you could offer the listener as to ways to reduce stress?
Yeah. So if anyone is listening in their car, the only caveat here is pull over. But here's a great one because we can all relate to pulling up in front of the building where we have to make a important sales call, or maybe we have to have a difficult conversation either with a customer, or if we're a sales manager or we're a salesperson and we have to have a conversation with our manager, or we're the manager and we have to have a difficult conversation with somebody who reports to us. Whatever that happens to be, this is a great technique to help get you grounded. And what it is, it's a very short meditation that comes from the Hawaiian culture. Find a spot on the wall in front of you, preferably above eye level, a stationary spot, and just start staring at that spot. And as you stare at that spot, notice you just let your mind go loose and focus all of your attention on that spot. And after a matter of moments, you'll notice that your vision starts to spread out and more in the peripheral than you do in the central part of your vision. And what I want you to do is just focus on the peripheral. In fact, pay more attention to the peripheral than the central part of your vision. And stay in that state for a few more seconds. Notice how it feels. And then go ahead and close your eyes. Open them back up. Notice that you're more aware of your surroundings and you're more grounded and you're better prepared to take on that important presentation, conversation, what have you.
Okay, that's weird because you're thinking that when you want to focus on it, that you want to close out the peripheral. Right. And then it's, wow, I didn't realize I had so much peripheral vision.
What happens is when you take in, especially let's say if you were right about before you're taking the stage for a presentation, if you take in your peripheral vision, you realize that you're more in contact with everything going on around you. And the reality is, when we feel more in control of what's going on around us, we tend to reduce our stress because our natural human nature is that when we feel more in control, when we feel like we are aware of our surroundings and everything going on, naturally stress goes down. And it's just a great grounding exercise.
I love it. What are you doing today with this and helping people? Because I know you've done a ton of volunteer work. Is this part of your business doing this, or talk to me about that?
So I do a lot of volunteer work. The business end of it comes when I work with various groups. They have me come in for maybe an hour presentation on this, also one-on-one coaching that I'll do with individuals if they need it. Most of the time it is having quick conversations with people and giving them a suggestion to try something. But the reality is the reason why my book has over 100 techniques in it is because something that works for me may not work necessarily for you and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And the vast majority of those techniques literally do take 5 minutes or less. So you try one. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, big deal. Took you just a couple of minutes, try another one next time. The bottom line is find something that works for you and utilize it on a daily basis, because if you use it on a daily basis, the compound benefits over time will be enormous because it becomes a habit. But you have to start today. That's the key.
Yeah, this is great advice. I forgot who I was watching recently, some YouTube video of a fellow who is pretty famous, but he talks about the 4-7-8 method. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, deep breathing.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't get a lot out of it. I mean, that might be one of those examples where it just may not work for me that well. It really depends on the individual.
It really does. And I've had so much feedback from individuals when I do my blog posts on different techniques. And they'll tell me, oh my God, this one worked. And sometimes it surprises me because the ones that don't work for me, I still write about them. Because just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work for somebody else. A great example of that was meditation. I've gotten better at meditation over time, but it's still not my go-to. And there are 300, 400, 500-page books on meditation. The reality is most of us might have a busy mind. I've realized that my busy mind, it is what it is. If I can come back to whatever my activity is in the meditation, that's okay. But if I'm really going to do something that I need to ground myself on, I might do that hakalau like we just did. My number one stress relief tool is gratitude. And that's something that we all need to have gratitude for. Whether we're in sales, marketing, there's always going to be those stressful things going on. The reality is, if somebody is not happy at work, unless they're in the financial position to leave and look for something else, what I always recommend to them, if you know that you need to make the move to leave that job, while you're still there, have gratitude for that job. We can all find 5 to 10 things on a daily basis that we can be grateful for. And it could be as simple as, I'm grateful for the health benefits or the salary that helps me pay my bills or the friends I have at work, whatever it happens to be. Because if we focus on the negative, the problem is when we send out that energy to the universe, that's the kind of energy we're going to attract back. And so if we are focused on whatever is wrong with our job, etc., then we're going to attract back negative energy. But if we're grateful for certain things, my wife and I, we do it on a nightly basis. We recap our day, and I ask her, what are you grateful for? And she asks me, what am I grateful for? And we just recap what it is. And mine every time is, I'm grateful for my health, because all else is secondary, knowing once, that I didn't have my health. And that's something that too many of us take for granted. And I always like to tell people, if you don't believe me how important your health is, think about the last time you were really sick, like with the flu or COVID or whatever it happened to be. Did you feel like doing anything other than lying in bed? Probably. And when you were just lying in bed with no energy to do anything else, you're no good to your company you work for, you're no good to the business you run, you're no good to the people that you care about in your life, you're no good to anybody. So don't take your health for granted. Don't trade your health for your career, because that's a really bad trade.
It is, absolutely. Baby, you're no good. There's a song. Baby, you're no good. Dude, I can't get the picture of you punting a toy organ across the room out of my mind, but this is helping. because I'm listening to this guy saying all about stress relief. So a few decades ago, you needed the later Professor Pete to
You
talk
bet.
to that young man.
That's exactly it. But part of why I did that was to make my coworkers laugh as well. They thought
Yeah.
it was the most hysterical thing. And those organs were just these cheap plastic crappy.
Yeah, I'm sure. You might have hurt the foot or something.
Exactly.
Then you'd have been in the emergency room for another reason.
It was so funny too because I'd always take the batteries out of it, and then the manager in the store would always put the batteries back in because, oh, we're not going to sell any of them if it doesn't have the batteries.
Oh my goodness, more silliness. But yeah, Professor Pete, you are awesome. Love the advice that you're giving. So you really helped us today on sales, the soft skills, dealing with people appropriately, recognizing the value of the brand, the mission. So much good stuff. We got to have balance here in life, right? Otherwise, we're going to be short lived and not get to enjoy it and help others as much. Any final thoughts, Professor Pete?
Yeah, I would just say with that note on balance, whatever that balance is, it's different for each person. So let's say for one person, they want to get 50% balance with friends and family and 50% balance with their career. But there might be others who say, hey, I need 90% of my time with my career and 10% with my family or friends. And all I say is, whatever works for you that feels right to yourself based on your own personal values. But if you are in the 90 to 10, 90% career, 10% with your friends and family, make sure that 10% is quality time. That's the key because just we've all seen at restaurants pre-COVID, even after COVID, where you have people sitting around the table, you look at them and everybody's on their phone. That's not quality time. That's
Right.
physical time.
Yeah,
Make sure it's quality time.
that's great.
Best place to find me is on my website, petealexander.com. That's where I have all those different stress relief tools and techniques. And they can also reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Outstanding. Be sure to do that. You'll be in for some great advice. Very helpful individual. So thank you for your support, Professor Pete. This has been a real blast. So thanks for showing up on the Sales Made Easy podcast, my friend.
Well, Harry, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate your listeners' time.
All right. Great stuff.